Hello and welcome back to Rock Records Reviewed. My name's Adam, and this week we're going to take a look at the top 10 Beatles solo albums. Now, if you watch regularly, you'll know I'm something of a Beatles nut, and I'm not too embarrassed to say I'm even wearing Beatles socks at the moment, which isn't very cool, I know. The Beatles split up in 1970, and John, Paul, George and Ringo all went on to make a number of solo records of very varying quality. This is something of a mixed bag, but let's attempt to sort the wheat from the chaff, and let's crack into it. Number 10, Ringo from 1973. This was Ringo's third solo album. Now, there's a caveat to this choice. There's probably one or two better Beatles solo albums that should be in this list ahead of this one, but I did want to put a Ringo album in there. He should be represented, and this is easily the best of his solo albums. It's a very likeable, breezy, effortless record. Most famous for Photograph, which he co-wrote with George Harrison. It's also got You're 16 on there, which was a worldwide hit, which I'm not sure he plays live that often anymore. And there's a whole host of guest appearances. Mark Bolan, Steve Cropper, Billy Preston, and all three Beatles play on various different tracks. It went top 10 and was very well received. If you can find the 1991 reissue, get that, because it has It Don't Come Easy on it as well, which was a great Ringo solo song, which didn't make it on the album first time round. At number 9, Paul McCartney's Flaming Pie from 1997, his 10th solo album. Paul had just previously made a number of sort of underwhelming records, and this was something of a renaissance, and the reason why is the songs were better, and Paul himself said that this album was a bit of a refresher course in how to write songs. It's co-produced by Jeff Lynne and George Martin. And there's some lovely songs for Linda on this record. I think she was ill at this point and sadly died a year later. And there's great cameos from Steve Miller, not least on the title track, but also the songs we were singing, Little Willow, Beautiful Night, Great Day. There's some really, really nice songs on here. It was kept off the top of the charts by the Spice Girls. But it's, to this day, it's still regarded as a superior Paul McCartney album, and was number 998 in one top 1,000 lists of all time, which shows you it just got in there under the wire as an album worth investigating. At number 8, George Harrison's Cloud 9 from 1987, his 11th solo album. George had been on a 5-year break. He'd been busy making films as well with Handmade Films, his production company, some very good ones as well. But he got Jeff Lynne in to produce, and Jeff's trademarks are all over this record. This very lush, clean pop rock production. This album was very successful, not least because of the single Got My Mind Set on You, which was a worldwide smash. You've also got When We Was Fab, Fish on the Sand, Devil's Radio. This is a fun record, I think, that deserved all the success it had. It's consistent, it's charming. Eric Clapton plays on it, Elton John plays on it, but the star here really is George and his lovely slide guitar. He's a wonderful slide guitar player, and his unique way with a melody. At number 7, another George Harrison record from 1973, Living in the Material World, his 4th solo album. This was the follow-up to All Things Must Pass and The Concert for Bangladesh, which he had instigated and became sort of the first big charity rock concert. So George was a major player by this point, as a solo artist, not just as a Beatle, but as a solo artist. And this was a keenly anticipated record. This is self-produced, and as a result, it's a very lush, spiritual-sounding record that I think bears repeated listening. Rolling Stone called it a radiant pop classic. It's got Give Me Love, Sue Me Sue You Blues, Try Some Buy Some. These might not be songs that you can sing off the top of your head, but they're very, very important songs in the George Harrison catalogue. It's tighter and more focused, I think, than All Things Must Pass. And there's some lovely singing, and again, some absolutely lovely guitar playing as well. At number 6, Paul McCartney's Chaos and Creation in the Backyard from 2005, his 13th solo album. Now, for this album, he roped in Nigel Godrich, who produced Radiohead and Beck. I think he was looking for a slightly cooler, edgier sound. Now, McCartney plays all the instruments on this record, and I love it when he does that. And he did that at Nigel Godrich's insistence, because when Paul McCartney plays all the instruments, he just brings a feel to it that's world away from the sort of session player feel you often hear on these on people's records. The album starts with Fine Line, which is a classic sort of Fab Makawaki thumbs aloft sing-along song, but things soon become a lot more interesting and unsettling after that. At the Mercy, Riding to Vanity Fair, there's definitely an aura of kind of modern indie cool on here, which I think is testament to Nigel Godrich's production. There's still a little bit of McCartney tweeness, particularly on a song like English Tea, but that's who he is. As usual, it's chock full of melody, but it has one or two darker surprises on it, which I think make it a more interesting record than many of his others. At number 5, John Lennon's Plastic Ono Band from 1970, his debut solo album. Now, John Lennon had been going through primal scream therapy, where you get in touch with your innermost feelings and you express them in a very raw, angry way. And that really informs this album. It's very, very clear, because this album it's simple and it's honest, it's intense, it's effective, and it's angry. Phil Spector comes in and to produce, but really there's not a great deal of production going on in here. The arrangements are very, very simple, the instruments are very simply recorded, and that voice just right down the middle in that sort of exposed, honest sort of stage that it's given. It's very, very effective. Mother, Working Class Hero, God, My Mummy's Dead. I mean, you get the idea of where John Lennon is at the time when he wrote these songs. It's a bit uncomfortable to listen to at times, actually, but you can't deny the song's power. And that voice, like I say, it just cuts through. It's incredibly affecting. And this album does make many, many lists of the greatest albums of all time. From number 4, Paul McCartney's Ram from 1971, his second solo album. Paul was in New York amidst all sorts of Beatles legal wranglings, and I think he decided to just immerse himself in utter Paul McCartneyism, because this is a very, very McCartney record. He's such a natural songwriter, Paul McCartney. He can craft a song about anything. It is who he is. It is what he does. Listen to something like Heart of the Country on here. It's just simple and charming, and he's rhyming, in such simple, unpretentious ways. It's really lovely. You've got Uncle Albert Admiral Halsey on here as well, which is just a bonkers song that it just works brilliantly. Ram, Too Many People. These songs sound sort of thrown together in places, but not dissimilar to his first album, McCartney, and they're full of what seem like throwaway lyrics, but they're married to just fabulous melodies that you can sing instantly, and that's really as part of Paul McCartney's incredible talent. At number 3, John Lennon's Imagine from 1971, his second solo album. Phil Spector again on board, and this time he does do more of a job of producing this record, because it's more orchestrated, it's more lush, it's more produced. Most of this was recorded at Ascot Studios at Tittenhurst Park, where John Lennon lived at the time. And you've got the usual suspects in on instruments. You've got Jim Keltner on drums, Klaus Voormann on bass, Nicky Hopkins on piano. Most famous, of course, for Imagine, John Lennon's signature tune. But it's also got Jealous Guy, another brilliant John Lennon song. Gimme Some Truth, Oh Yoko, and his How Do You Sleep, which is a song he wrote against Paul McCartney. But I don't think the two were talking at the time very much at all. This isn't a perfect record by any means, but what I think it does do is it distills so much of what was great about John Lennon on one record. The honesty, the wit, the edge of nastiness, and also the idealism. So if you're looking for a record that encapsulates who John Lennon was as a solo artist, I think this is certainly the one to go for. So number 2, from 1973, Band on the Run. This was, by this stage, Paul McCartney with Wings, and this was the third album they'd made together. Now, Wings at this stage was Paul McCartney, Linda McCartney on backing vocals and some keyboards, and Denny Laine, who had joined from the Moody Blues. And much of this album was recorded in fairly arduous circumstances in Nigeria. There's all sorts of fun stories about what happened when they were recording it. And this is Macca at the top of his game. Many songs on here I think would have graced Beatles albums, not least, of course, the title track, Band on the Run, which is one of my absolute favourite Paul McCartney songs. The strength of the songs is really consistent. You've got Jet, Bluebird, Let Me Roll It, and the wonderful 1985. When this came out, I think people loved it. The critics were kind of underwhelmed, but it didn't really sell in great quantities. It eventually, word of mouth caught on. It ended up selling about 6 million copies. Q magazine put it about number 75 in their all-time top 100 British albums of all time. And Rolling Stone put it at 418 in the top 500 albums of all time. Now, all these lists are fairly meaningless. They're just sort of to give you an indication of certain things. Particularly, my lists are totally meaningless, of course. But it gives you an idea of overall how these albums are received. And I think absolutely, there's no question that post Beatles, Band on the Run is the very best example of Paul McCartney. But my number one solo Beatles record is George Harrison's All Things Must Pass, which is an album he'd made just as the Beatles split up. Now, a couple of things that's important to remember here. George Harrison had been growing and growing as a songwriter. He'd been taking on influences like Bob Dylan, the band, Delaney and Bonnie, and he was writing all sorts of great songs, and a good example of how good he was becoming is look at Abbey Road. By that stage, he arguably contributed to that album the two best songs, Here Comes the Sun and Something. But John and Paul were still turning down some of his records, and this was very frustrating for him. So by the time the Beatles split up, he had loads and loads of songs ready to go, and this, people, is a triple album. Yes, a triple album. Now, and it's probably the only triple album I will ever put in any of these lists. Because you know what I think about overlong records. But the first two discs on this record are wonderful. There's at least a dozen superb songs on here. My Sweet Lord, of course, is the huge international hit, which was number one twice. But you've also got Isn't It Pity, Beware of Darkness, What Is Life, All Things Must Pass, which the Beatles did pass over. There's a cover of Dylan's If Not For You, which is very nice. I mean, these are the two discs. The first two discs here are the ones that define this record, really. The last disc is made up of some jams, and I can take it or leave it. But the thing is, in the spirit of the record, I'm going to take it. There's an army of friends that George has roped in to help him here. There's Ginger Baker, Peter Frampton, Gary Brooker, Eric Clapton, all of Badfinger. Ringo's on there, Klaus Vormann. I mean, this is the thing about the record. It's loose and it's full of creativity and confidence, and there's a spirit and warmth on the album that welcomes you in to listen, and it sort of lifts your spirits with his really touching, sweet, affecting lyrics, and then his twisting, winding, fascinating way with a melody. And I think that's why I'm going to take the jams on the third disc, because it really is just, everyone come in, get together, and let's make some wonderful music. But again, George is very much in charge of what's going on here. It's easy, in retrospect, to underestimate him as an artist in the shadow of Paul and John. This album is quite a statement. It's a wonderful, wonderful record, and one which arguably no solo Beatle ever bettered. I think there's some honourable mentions to other records. McCartney's first solo record is a really lovely sort of throwaway piece of pop, and Venus and Mars is not a bad Wings record. Double Fantasy has got some really, really good songs on it. Of course, John Lennon's Double Fantasy. But Beatles fans are a passionate bunch. I'm sure you disagree. So if you do, please say so in the comments below and let's discuss it. I look forward to reading those. Until then, I will see you again very soon for another Rock Records Reviewed. Thank you. Bye-bye.